Hi, this is Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Holman. We're going to talk about the Renaissance today.
Yeah, and we'll just throw in, we started there with the Beatles. That was revolution. And I like that second line where he says, we know we all want to change the world, and that's kind of the idea we've been talking about with our students. And the Renaissance is a time of drastic change. So let's get started with it.
Right. So we'll start with, letting you, obviously on the screen, you see the Renaissance was from about 1350 to 1700. We really like this image on the left because it does a great job of showing all the different elements of the Renaissance and what was all used in order to make this flower of the Renaissance grow, with the key ingredient being the sun, and in this case is labeled humanism. And without humanism, and we'll talk about what that is here in a little bit, without humanism, this whole notion, this idea never even gets started. The classical age are the roots, and it's what the Renaissance is based off of. And I guess I should have mentioned that the Renaissance means rebirth. And so in this case, it's the rebirth of the classical age, referring to the Greeks and the Romans.
Yeah, so I think a way to think about it is when we studied before, we talked about Greece and Rome, specifically down here at the bottom, creating such amazing things. And then it seems like with the fall of Rome, the seeds died. But they didn't really. They just stayed buried down here in the ground, waiting for something to give them the light to get out of here. So I'm kind of scribbling on those roots, because here's where all the classical ideas are. They're lost. And through the Middle Ages, there's a couple spider roots that come off, but it's not a powerful time like the Renaissance is going to be. So you had mentioned humanism, and humanism in our object is shown as the sky up here, as the sun. So whatever is feeding the plant is this humanistic idea. And we're going to talk about that as we go through this chat. But humanism, in a nutshell, is the power of the individual to do amazing things, to look inward to solve problems. So it's going to be a change from looking to God to answer all the problems. And you had travel and commerce begins to increase. We talked about that with the Crusades, which we'll pick up in a minute. That's kind of watering these plants, giving the plant food, giving it a time to start to grow. And then you had the growth of the city-state, which is the rise of nations. So we are starting to see nations develop in Europe. So we're going to see these idea of nations. France, Germany, they are beginning. Anything else you want to say, Mr. Armstrong?
Just, that then the other thing that we'll talk about with the Renaissance are these wonderful aspects that come up out of it, like the flowers, like the blooming of the flower. But we'll talk more about that as we go. So were you good with this slide, Mr. Holman?
Yeah, let's roll on to slide number 2. I think we just kind of mentioned some of these, so I'll kind of pick it up real quick. We want to get through some of these slides really quick. So you had ancient Greece here. No, we don't have my pen on. Hang on just a second.
Yeah. Circle it for you.
Okay, thank you. And then you had Rome. You might as well circle that one while you're at it. And those are the two classics that we're going to refer to all the time, the classic societies. We then went into the Middle Ages, so all of Europe, maybe my pen's black, I'm just going to kind of scribble here. All of Europe kind of falls into this idea of the Middle Ages, and all knowledge and ideas are kind of being lost to them. They don't know what's going on in the world around them. But while that's happening, over here in this region, and I'm going to circle, the Islamic culture is thriving. So maybe you can highlight that point with your color a little bit. And the Islamic culture actually stole all those ideas that the Greeks and Romans were doing, and brought them over, and they continue to work on them. So they took these ideas over here and continued to build on the Greek and Roman ideas. Well, and that led us to feudalism. So again, they're kind of closed off. But what happened near the end of the Middle Ages was a couple of important things. If you can erase those for me real quick, that would be great. A couple of important things happened. And the first one, I think we erased a little too far there, but we'll get it. It's only our second time, kids. Cut us a break, okay? So we can leave it right there. It's good enough. So on the Crusades, it took the Europeans to the Holy Lands, and there was a clash between and I'm going to add this because I just found that it's really cool, okay? Okay, so we had a war, right? So that was a sword. If I can move it out so you could see it. So the sword's there. So in that fight, these cultures clash. But the Europeans, when they come home after failing from the Crusades, when the Europeans do come home, they bring back with them all these new ideas and cultural developments. So they come back full of ideas and questions about the world. And they start to share those questions with other people. About the same time, 1350, the Black Death starts over here. So the Black Death is in China. And it is being carried along the Silk Road, and it comes to Europe. Bad news. Cultures have clashed again. And we're going to pick it up again on the next slide with those ideas. But we're kind of getting an overview of what we've already talked about. Next slide. And there's where we were kind of talking. Maybe we spent too much time there, so we'll make this real quick. Do you want to talk, or do you want me to?
Yeah, well, it's just, I mean, this image just kind of highlights a couple of the things that were brought from Asia to Europe by the Mongols, and making this trade route secure, where people were able to make the long distance travels and able to trade and bring these things back to the European side. I'd like to mention too that it's not just the physical things that are brought back to Europe, like Mr. Holman was kind of speaking about. There is also this idea of the ideas that are brought back, and this revival of interest of learning and so forth. But I may be getting a little ahead of myself here.
Yeah, that's all right. Those are important ideas. So I think we kind of get those. But that key idea up there is when cultures collide, neither stays the same. So we're going to have to see cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion is going to happen. The Chinese and the people of Asia are going to be picking up new ideas, new ways of seeing the world. And the Europeans are starting to bring back to the Middle Age philosophy of life new ideas. They're going to challenge the way they've lived for the last 1,000 years. So let's move on to the next slide. So the first thing, why don't you talk a little bit about this new organization start?
So the new organization is, there are families in Europe that have a great deal of money, and they begin to kind of bankroll some of the movements from the Renaissance. So this statue, the statue of David, made during the Renaissance, and a family had put up the money to pay Leonardo to put up the money for him to be able to create this and to get paid. And it was something that was built and created to share with the world. And this picture is actually taken from when I was in Florence last summer. And I like it because it does a pretty good job of letting you see how tall the statue actually is.
Right, and that's called commissioning. And that was the idea that there were wealthy enough people to pay artists to develop art for the public square, for the city, to make the cities beautiful. The Medicis were one of the most important families, and they basically did that through trade. As trade increased, people were bringing lots and lots of money back. And there needed to be some way to account for money. You needed to have some way for society to store money. So these banking organizations started, not as a major shift. We've never really seen that too much in the Middle Ages. Maybe the church had some of that, but to have public banking in places where money is being stored and trade is being encouraged through that is going to become really important. So we got a couple key ideas here. What is banking? What are commissions? And this idea of beautifying the city, creating a place that looks beautiful. Again, that idea that the Middle Ages wasn't about beauty, it was about survival. Now we want to see beautiful things. We want it to look beautiful around us. I sense a change coming. Next one. And that's going to lead us to this one, this idea of cutting out the middlemen. Another thing that develops are trading companies. So the companies from Europe, and I'm going to kind of do some math here. If in China a silk costs $1, the Chinese would, in the Silk Road, it wasn't like a person jumped on here and then they ran all the way to Europe and traded. It's not how it worked. The man would go here and trade at this point, and he would get $2 for that piece of silk. And then he would go home. And this guy would take the silk and he would go to the next major village, and now he would get $3 and he would go home. Now, if we follow this out, This guy's going to get $4 and then he goes home. This guy goes out, he gets $5 and then he goes home. This guy goes, he gets $6, he goes home, goes here, 7. That means by the time it goes through Europe, at least one more time, maybe 2, it costs you $10 to buy a piece of silk. But if I could get rid of all these guys, how much could I get silk for? $1. Now I'd have to haul it back, but this opens a whole new world up to the Europeans. How can we cut out all these middlemen and make money for ourselves or save ourselves money? So this is going to be where Europeans begin to look for trade routes. They try to establish their own trade routes that maybe they can control. Or they begin to look out of sea, and we can't really see everything right here, but we'll pretend. They're trying to find sea routes. And that's on their little sturdy boats. So I like to draw boats, so there's their boat.
Yeah.
Okay? So this is the beginning of the age of exploration. People are starting to look beyond their current walls.
Yeah, if you guys remember back to when we talked about the Silk Road for Rome, and one of the videos that we showed, or that we, if nothing else, showed last year, it said that by the time that gold was worth, that silk was worth more than its weight in gold, and that just speaks to the whole notion of why with what Mr. Holman was just saying with the price increasing. So I mean, think about it. A pound of gold is less valuable, and during Rome, a pound of gold was less valuable than a pound of silk, which is pretty remarkable.
That is pretty amazing, pretty amazing. All right, well, let's move on. We don't want to take forever to get through this.
So this causes, and as you see, wait for it, we have new science, new technology to be developed. You've got mathematical achievements that are made that help with the construction of Brunelleschi's dome here. And then the image of the dome finished in the bottom right-hand corner. You've got the achievements in science and astronomy, learning about the stars and so forth, exploration, development of new ships, and so forth. And there's some art in here, but I feel like we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slides. Anything to...
The whole idea is they're beginning to look again at the world around them. Instead of the Middle Ages, they're looking internally, they're looking to God to understand the world. What you start to see here is them looking at the world around them, looking into space. Now, there's not an image of a microscope, but a microscope's another thing. So they're looking at the smallest minute things, trying to understand them. This is having people look at the world and try to explain the world they live in based on science, not based on what religion says, okay? But looking at the world and trying to understand the world in a humanistic point of view, how humans are impacting the world they live in. Where do we fit in? What's our place? And that's part of that age of exploration too. What is out there? What does the world have to offer us? Okay, so those are going to be key things we continue to look for.
Yeah, and all those things tie in so heavily with the idea of humanism. And I mean, that's probably one of the biggest themes throughout all this. So you ready for next slide?
Sure.
Now, the image that you're looking at here is some of the different art that came out of the Renaissance. You've got the Mona Lisa, the Sistine Chapel, and then I'll let Mr. Holman talk about the other two here in a second. But the bright colors of the Sistine Chapel, the Mona Lisa being like an everyday quote unquote normal person, those that speaks to the humanistic culture, the humanistic view. And you guys will learn quite a bit more about the Sistine Chapel in terms of the bright colors and the perspective of the Mona Lisa and so forth as you go through some of the requirements with the Zaptions that some of the art teachers from Davis recorded.
Okay, I wanted to see if I had a little image here, but I'll just we'll just roll on. So one thing that he mentioned was this is Leonardo, this is Michelangelo, this is Raphael. We're only missing one of the famous Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's Dante. However, this is not Dante. This is actually my favorite piece of Renaissance artwork, and it's called the View of Toledo, done by El Greco. And what I think we want you to see here is the bright colors, even in this area, seeing the bright blues up here and the oranges that peek out, and the colors in this, and the bright greens, and seeing how you see a lot of green colors. A lot of the colors are bright. Mona Lisa, we don't know who she is, everyday people. This is pretty religious up here, but it's built for a church. We'll talk a little about that later. But one common theme is everyday people, the view of the city. There's perspective. Notice how this image goes back, and you can see depth in the image, and you'll talk more about that as you go. But these are all built off the classic ideas of artwork. So they're looking back to Greece and Rome. So again, that reference back to Greece and Rome. I think Mr. Armstrong's now going to pull up a project you might want to take a look at and play with a little bit during this quest.
So this is the Google Art project. And as you see, I already went through and I found two different images to compare. So this one on the left was created during the Renaissance. The one on the right was created during the classical age. And there you can see a lot of similarities in the way that they, first of all, in the way that they look, and then that they're both doing action. They're both active people or active movements. Another good piece to add to the one on the left, which is the Renaissance, is this is once again just a normal person doing a daily activity. I mean, he's pulling a thorn out of his foot. There's nothing famous about him. He has no tie to a religious movement or anything of that nature. So just to reiterate that it is focused on the humanistic views and life from our perspective, and not as much necessarily from a religious standpoint.
Well, and as we go back to the Bay board, that was something you mentioned that, well, I guess we didn't talk about too much, but that idea of movement, that there's movement in a lot of the sculptures and the things you're going to see. Like even the El Greco, the movement of the clouds, even though you can't literally see them moving, you can tell the clouds are rolling in. So there is that idea, or in this one, the men walking forward, they're coming to the group. Which this, by the way, the title of this is The School of Athens, which again is a direct reference back to the classics. The School of Athens. So Euclid, Pythagorean, Socrates, Aristotle, they're all seen in this pictures, these people that made Greece, or in this case, Greece great. So I better move on.
Okay, just one more thing. If, students, I highly suggest that you go to the 3D version of the Sistine Chapel, so you can put yourself in the middle of it and see it and zoom in on it. It's pretty cool, and it's a good place for you to.
In the electronic resources for them.
Right. So, all right.
Well, all of this changes life and it changes society. We already mentioned a couple ways it changed society with the ideas of banking and the idea of trading companies that are going to start to search for how to create more trade. But life drastically changes. We talked probably somewhere around 98% of the people during the Middle Age could not read. That number is going to start to drop. It doesn't just go to zero, but it is going to drop because of this. This is the printing press created by Johann Gutenberg. And the printing press made it possible to mass produce books. The books still had binders on them to hold the parchment in place, but they could produce hundreds, if not thousands, of copies of a book. No longer does one person have to sit in a room and handwrite everything. It also made the cost of the books cheaper, because now you're mass producing. So they're going to be faster, they're going to be cheaper. With the advent of books and humanism led to more universities. Most of the most famous universities of Europe are started now. People begin to attend them, and they start to study something called the humanities. Okay, and that's what it's up there now. We're going to live for now. We're going to study the humanities. The humanities are poetry and language and history. They're the things that people do. Music. It's what we do that we begin to study. So we've turned away from studying the Bible and studying God and religion. Not every person, by the way. But many people start to turn away from that and begin to study what humans do. The more educated society you get, it leads to a broader middle class. The middle class becomes important as we progress forward. In the image below, about 50% say they're middle class. When you have a strong middle class, you have money to spend. When you have money to spend, you need more trade, right? So it's going to encourage trade to keep going. People are going to continue to trade. When you have more trade, you get more cultural diffusion, because more and more ideas are being passed between societies. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, one thing I want to add is, during this time too, it's pretty close to the first time that you can change your stars, or you can get out of the social class that you were born into, and you were able to move up in social status. And I see a lot of similarities between that and the American dream today. The idea that you can go be more, or you can make your life better. I see a lot of similarities between those two things. So I just felt like that was kind of good to point out here for us.
Okay. Well, I think the last thing we'll point out is now if you look at a map, you all of a sudden see very familiar names. England, France, Spain, Portugal. They begin to look like the map you're used to seeing. So you see the rise of the nation state. The nation has to become powerful so that they can control the trade. That's what they need to do. So each country is becoming more and more powerful so that they can protect the trade and keep the flow of money coming to them and not the other people. Does that make sense? Is that good?
Yeah, looks great.
I like to scribble on these things. It's fun. Okay, next slide, because we're way past where we thought we'd be done. I think that takes us to our last slide, and we'll just start by saying this. Humanism, or the Renaissance, is a revolution. It is not a revolution like this of men shooting guns at each other and trying to kill each other, but it is actually a revolution in the mind of individuals.
An intellectual movement.
Yeah, it's an intellectual movement about people. And it was described, I'm not sure if this was by Galileo or who, but it was described this way. To each species, a creature has been allotted a particular and distinctive gift. To horse, to gallop, to birds, flying comes naturally. To man, only is given the desire to learn. Humanism is about the human ability to learn and change the world that we live in, to make it a better place, and that humans have the power to impact the world they live in. The humanistic spirit, the Renaissance, doesn't happen without that. It is a fundamental idea underlying really society as it exists today. It's a worldview of many people. Individuals have power. Anything you want to add?
No, I was just trying to look up to see who did say it, and I didn't get there in time. But I do. Oh, it was. I can't even pronounce the name. Battista Garanio.
Okay, I'm not sure who that is, but
yeah.
I'm sure it was somebody important.
Right.
Very humanistic. So we may have went over our time limit today. We apologize to you guys. We might split it in half, or we'll see how it plays out. But first off, hopefully this is helpful and gives you a broad overview of the Renaissance. Have a good day. You can say goodbye.
See you guys.
Okay, there we go.